Welcome. Really a true pleasure to be chatting with you today. So for those of you who don't know Charles, Charles is a very successful serial entrepreneur, have done many hardware startups. And what's interesting that you've also done many difficult hardware products, experience-based hardware products. You were the co-founder of Red Octane and Guitar Hero.
Yes.
And Blue Goji and now Indigo 7. And you were really able to bring into the market some of the products that were counterintuitive at the time to that market. Go ahead and introduce yourself and we'll go to some of the questions.
Yeah, so my name is Charles Huang. I guess first and foremost, I think of myself as a video game entrepreneur. My hardware experience started building controllers for hardware, and then eventually building game experiences like Guitar Hero that are both hardware and software. Back when we started this in the early 2000s, the idea that hardware and software work together was pretty unique. So that's one of the things that's a little different. Today, I think people think of that all the time. Every hardware has an app, etc. But back then, the world was kind of, you were divided into a hardware company or a software company. And didn't really try to do both. And so we were doing this and really developed, I would say, this idea that hardware and software should work together in this experience. And that's how I kind of have approached hardware for most of my career.
Today, I want to dig actually a little bit deeper into some of the questions about how can you scale a hardware startup with less pain. I think that we can kind of break it down to three phases. Phase one might be the market fit, just finding that market fit, and then there's small scale and large scale. So let's break it down to these three phases and we can go from there. So with regard to market fit, I think you have been really able to very well cut short the development cycles. I like this saying that the best part is no part. And so how do you kind of draw a line there when you're sort of going through that sort of market fit process?
I think the market fit is always, I think maybe one of the hardest challenge for an entrepreneur of any markets, hardware or software. Trying to understand deeply what you're selling helps. So one of our first, when we were very, very small, one of our first successful products were these dance pads that were plugged into a PlayStation 2 for a game called Dance Dance Revolution. And we sold these kind of high-end, we created this very high-end dance pad that sold for $100 when most other dance pads were selling for $20. And it was kind of puzzling to a lot of retailers why anybody, when we pitched it, why anybody would pay 5 times the price.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And what I think we understood, because we were very close to these hardcore gamers, was that we understood what features we were selling them and what they were buying. It wasn't like great technology, but just sort of intuitive UI understanding and UX understanding. We put these plastic markers underneath the buttons so you could feel if you were standing on the button or not. And just that change meant that they knew their foot's position on the pad at all times. And they knew if they slid off the button. So the scores got higher. Now, I don't think the players understood why the scores got higher, but you saw posts in boards and word of mouth that use this pad, it'll get you a higher score.
Interesting.
And what we understood then when we heard that was that they weren't buying a dance pad from us, they were buying a higher score, which meant a lot to hardcore gamers. And so once we understood that, then all of our features went towards that. And when we found product market fit with this core group of high-end gamers. And so like that was one example where we understood they were buying a higher score, not some vague concept of a higher quality dance pad that's worth 5 times more.
But was there any like pilot phase or any of these companies that you had that was like, okay, we're not quite sure how this is going to help the user. We're just going to put it in front of user and see how, listen to them and so on. What was your experience with like piloting some of those, versions like Guitar Hero or, the dance pad and so on that you're talking about? Were you actually like bringing some users into the office to use it and see, what may work better? Or was it like, no, let's go just build an inventory and we're just going to take this to the market?
Certainly, I think it was the former. So, for a very specific piece of hardware we built, which was for Guitar Hero, we built a drum kit. What is the user experience for drumming in our game? And through a series of brainstorms and sort of talking to users, talking to drummers, talking to people on the team, we came down to two concepts. One was we wanted people to be able to cross their hands while they were playing. And then two was we wanted people to be able to hit the drum pad hard or soft, and the game should somehow know the difference, right? React to that. And we started with just that before we started with what the hardware was going to be. And then we set the hardware team off and the software team off with those two basically vague UX concepts. And so all these things sort of came after the initial brainstorm of what is the UX, the user experience that we want to build.
Right.
And so I feel like that was always our North Star, was talking to consumers before there was any idea. It's very hard when you don't have something to put in front of them, but you want to give them like, what is drumming to you?
What did you, like, how did you do that? You just like brought, made like test teams, or you just went to like gaming conferences and start chatting with gamers, or like, how do you collect that data? What was the frame of doing that data collection?
So we, we would start with people who first enjoyed music games, who had some idea. We would talk to actual drummers, and they could be beginning drummers, they could be expert drummers. It didn't matter. We just talked to people who understood. We also had a core group of people in our company who played a lot of music games. Some of them were musicians, sort of amateur musicians on the side.
You were kind of a user of your own product in some ways.
Exactly. So over the years, we built a lot of that expertise in-house.
So one of the interesting things I want to ask about here is basically, of course, this product was maybe easier to sort of like experiment and build. And some of the hardware companies, these days are deep tech companies, it's not as easy to really go through that cycle very quickly.
Right.
And so usually people do like pilot programs or, early access programs, and they test with some of the other companies that have more sort of knowledge of that market and so on. So what do you think of that? What do you generally think of doing NRE projects with other companies? NRE yay or NRE nay?
Well, I think, we certainly paid our fair share of NREs over the years. In our specific product, the user experience was what we thought was the key. We were not developing deep tech like you guys are. And so for us, it felt like we needed to really have user experience expertise in-house. And then for other areas, we would lean on NREs, consultants, CM NREs. We didn't have wireless expertise, so we would lean on outsiders to bring in Bluetooth or something else expertise.
How did you, when you were sort of introducing this product to the market, let's say at this very early small scale, right? What were the ideas and things that you kind of decided not to go with? Like anything specific that you were like, I was actually initially excited about this feature, but now that I think about it and listen to customers, probably we should drop that.
Right.
So can you give me some examples of that? And did you develop any kind of like foresight or sort of rules of thumb on how to simplify the idea, how to simplify the product, so that it gets sort of closer to that core value that you're trying to bring?
For Guitar Hero 1, we started with a very simple, you talk about simplifying. We didn't have a lot of time to develop that product, so we went straight forward everything. It was a wired controller that plugged into a PlayStation 2. We were just one platform. We didn't try to do PC or even Xbox or anything else. Just a single controller with a wire that plugged into a PlayStation 2 that worked with a game on PlayStation 2. We then put in a lot of other sensors into this thing. There were some mechanical switches we used that we thought were a little bit easier. And so we went with as simple as a sort of components as we could get. And as a result, our development time was very fast. But one of the things we learned was also that out of the box, we needed them to get to fun fast. Fast to fun, I used to say that. So when they opened the box, they plugged this thing into the PlayStation 2, they put the disc in. Within 5 minutes after taking it home, they were having fun. They were playing the game. And that was a fantastic win for us. By the time we got to Guitar Hero 4, we had this big kit of, like a guitar, a drum,
bunch of variations.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And a microphone. The guitar and the drum had to be assembled, right? It was just fit better in a box that way, but you had to get home and you had to assemble it. And they were wireless. So then after you assembled everything, you had to install the batteries because it's wireless. And then after you install the batteries, then you have to then pair each of these with the Xbox or the PlayStation, right? And then once you paired and get that all assembled, you were ready to play. It made sense why we did that. There were all these like business reasons. It fit better in the box. It was lower cost for us to ship. But one of the things we realized after we shipped it was we went from 5 minutes to fun to 45 minutes of installation out of the box, right?
Yeah.
And that was a fail, we realized. Big failure on our part that we were now like
adding sophistication.
Yes, right. This technology that we put in there that made the product better from an engineering viewpoint was actually getting in the way of the consumer just having fun with the product. Whenever you add a new component that enables new features, it almost 99.9% of the times it makes the product more complicated. And I do think that for any hardware product, the ability to sort of capture a wow effect on the user within a few minutes
is very important.
Yeah, it's very important. There's something magical, right? When they see it, or when they touch it and they go, wow, look at this. This is unlike anything I've ever felt. That I feel was the experience.
Yeah. Now we are in phase 2, which is small scale production. So we have done some pilots. We're like, okay, there's something here.
Right.
And we want to take it from those early pilots, those few units, prototypes that we have sold, to a kind of like a small scale production, going from tens to hundreds to thousands of units. Right. How do you go about doing that?
It takes about 3 iterations before you get, the first one is you're just trying to get this piece of hardware to work, right? And as long as it's stable.
Right.
And then maybe the second time you come back and you're trying to fix some of the problems that you had, some of the unstable components, maybe do a little bit of improvement on the design. And then if you come back and you get a third chance to make that, then this is where you now can cost down the product. You can make it very stable. You can make it very beautiful. And that's, it takes a few iterations to get there. So to your point about like going from tens of units, which is mostly just like this thing works. Yeah. It doesn't work forever. It's just kind of stable for a few weeks. And then now we're gonna get to a point where, okay, we can get a few hundred units out. In those phases, when you start generally getting, in our case, we get into some production runs with CMs, for instance. Right? There's a lot of things that we tried to do. CMs, even if they're building the same product, they're all a little bit different.
Right.
Some are a little bit more flexible. They can change things on the fly with you.
Right.
At certain points, you use a CM that can work with you for the particular phase that you're in. So in this case, probably you want to pick a CM that is very flexible and can work with you as you change components and change designs. When you're in the sort of the hundreds phase, in our case, we didn't really generally, even as a smaller startup, didn't worry about COGS and the cost of components at that stage. You're not going to save a lot when you're building hundreds of units.
Right.
I just joke, like, even if the cost was zero, you're not going to save that much money overall.
Right.
But what was expensive is generally you've got a lot of engineers sitting in the office, and every day, that's a lot of salary
exactly.
that's going out. So like, if you're the CEO of the company, you have to be aware of like, all right, I'm not going to worry about COGS on a few hundred units. I'm just going to worry about like getting this thing fast into the market. Exactly. Right, to the market.
Yeah.
And so finding the right CM, finding the right, the quickest components, right? It may not be the cheapest, it may not be the most stable, whatever. Just everything was built around, let's get into the market fast and get a lot of feedback.
But is there any other marker for a contract manufacturer as a small scale that would be a good partner? Like, how would you know this guy is going to be a good partner for this scale that I'm doing, or this guy is going to get me into trouble?
Right. There's a bunch of things around, for instance, technology expertise, right? Some might have a lot more experience with certain types of wireless products, like they have a lot of experience with different kinds of Bluetooth radios. Others might have a lot of experience with building things that need to be waterproof, because they're bringing expertise from 5 or 10 other projects that they've worked on for you. So I think any CM that has that experience can be helpful. And to your earlier question about NREs, that's a time where we felt like, hey, this is worth it to pay that NRE because they have years of experience in an area that we don't. Decision making is one that can catch a lot of people off guard when they're dealing with contract manufacturers. I thought it was important for us to try to get to understand how they make a decision. So if we asked them to change a component and they turned around and said, oh, we have to go talk to purchasing, and then we have to talk to finance, and then we have to talk to engineering, then we knew that, okay, this is going to be a difficult partner to work with at this stage, right? Where somebody else might say, like, just 2 or 3 people get in a room.
That's I think, very interesting. I think that kind of shows that, actually maybe a smaller scale partner will be better for small scale production, because that chain of command is much shorter. And one of the things that I think is important is actually going after that market. Like, how can you, at that small scale, what is the best, marketing partner or marketing strategy to take a hardware product to that kind of market when you still don't have, tens of thousands of unit inventory or something like that?
With the distribution partner, it's the same thing. Speed was important. Get this into the market, into the wild, and get as much feedback as quickly as we can. I always thought it also helped us to be as close to the customer as we could be. Early on in our company, when we were very small, I found it very useful that sometimes my brother, who is the other co-founder, and I would read customer service emails when somebody returned products, just to find out, like, and I would say like 90% of them were kind of not that helpful, but every once in a while somebody would send in something that would be very helpful. They might even tell you how to fix a problem. And so getting closer to the customer, being able to move fast through the distribution channel, and that's everything from being able to pitch if it's a retail partner or if it's a specific enterprise customer, being able to pitch them, get a quick decision, move the product into the channel quickly. All of that was, I thought, very helpful at that phase of the company.
I mean, we're actively actually helping with like decision making on marketing. I remember I watched one of your videos and you said you had only maybe 30K of marketing money left in the bank or something like that. From different types of marketings and there's many different types, and today's getting to like influencers and maybe going to conferences, and you had the strategy of making a lot of like demo setups in different retail stores and so on. Which of them really did you like the best that you think was actually more proper for that smaller scale production? Which one was more effective?
In our specific product case, we needed people to try it. And we always had this belief that if they tried it, if they could hit a string of maybe, in the case of Guitar Hero, string of 10 consecutive notes, they would realize how fun this was. So depending on the type of product, I always feel like hardware can be beneficial if people can see it, feel it, right, and touch it. And there's a little bit of magic sometimes to that.
For sure. And I think that, of course that industrial design also shines pretty well, but, as a startup, there's also this balance that you have to juggle with, which is how much time am I going to spend on simplifying the design and how much time am I going to spend glorifying it? Am I trying to make a Lamborghini, or am I trying to make a, the first Toyota with like, something that moves with 4 wheels or something like that. So that there's that balance that has to be there. But I guess one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is like that arc between tens of units to thousands of units, for the financing of that. When you go to these contract manufacturers, small scale contract manufacturers, is there any counterintuitive ways to finance that? Like a smart way to finance that without having to like take the company into the bankruptcy or something like that? Let's say you don't have enough money and you just want to really get some of that finance. What would be the best way to do that?
You always have to be careful about working capital and money, like much more so than in say software, maybe some other industry. So I think in our case, there are sometimes partners who can help you fund something creatively, especially on a small scale. So if you have customers that sometimes are willing to maybe pay in advance or help you finance some of that. We had different wholesale distribution partners who would sometimes advance payment to guarantee exclusive distribution into a certain territory, for instance. And so like distribution partnerships is one creative way to finance that. Finding a distribution partner is helpful. It's a little bit easier if you have margin in your product, because then the distribution partner can make more margin, which then gives them motivation to finance that for some kind of exclusive partnership.
So what do you think of these like beta stores, and there's some kind of hardware startup, assisting small-scale distributors?
Right.
Is there anything that comes to mind for you that you think that would be interesting?
Well, I think if you're lucky, then you might be in a circumstance where you have multiple retailers in the marketplace who, one of the things I realized when we first went out to pitch Guitar Hero 1 was there was at that time two boutique video game retailers. One was GameStop and one was Electronics Boutique.
Right.
We realized that they were evaluating our product, but they really were looking through it to their competitors to see like, all right, this looks interesting. If I can get an exclusive in my stores, then that would give me a leg up on my competitors. So the buyers were always looking at products and thinking about that and trying to cut deals that would strengthen their competitive position against someone else. And then you can kind of leverage that.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you might have a distribution partner who is maybe for instance, if you're more enterprise, a value-added reseller who's trying to look for an entry into a certain market or certain customers, and your product might help them, and that gives them a little bit more value than what you like the core value of your product. And so in that sense, they might be willing to do some financing and other things to guarantee an exclusive distribution with you. And you can look at it exclusive distribution in territories, certain accounts, certain industries.
Is there any region that you think is more open to like these experience-based products? Like, is it better to start doing something like run the first run with a small production in Japan, or in some other countries, or should it be really close to home in the United States? What do you think about that?
There's a couple ways to kind of approach that. One is, of course, the markets themselves have very different customers. Yeah, right. And so generally, like Canada is very similar to the United States. Japan is going to be very different, right? And even if you go to Europe, there are some countries like, if you go to UK, that's very similar to the United States, but Germany might not be as similar. Right. And so I think looking at some of those is important, but also just some very basic tactical things, like you have somebody who is there that you can work with quickly and easily, right? And somebody who's eager.
Right.
So in the case of Guitar Hero 1 distribution, we did have a distributor in the UK that was very easy to work with, and we had a distributor in Australia that was easy to work with. They were good markets. Australia may not have been the top of our list at that time, but we had a very easy opportunity.
Interesting.
So low-hanging fruit. Again, just always with the kind of eye on speed, we think, okay, well, they're interested, we're interested. Rather than try to seek out this bigger market that in Canada that might be a better fit, let's just go with the Australians because we have an easy partner to work with.
Awesome. So now let's go to the third phase, which is basically the scaling.
Right.
You've sold tens of millions of these hardware, and which is very impressive. What are the major pains in that scale?
Right.
And I guess what is the best way to sort of resolve some of those pains, or at least minimize those pains?
Yes.
What do you think about?
Your first sort of major production run, kind of ideally you get into the 10,000 plus, right? Then you get certain things. I remember, the first time we were looking at kind of hundreds of thousands of units, certain limitations begin to pop up. By Guitar Hero 3, our peak production for Guitar Hero 3, I remember, was running close to 250,000 units a week.
Oh my God.
And so like certain kinds of things that we never imagined kind of pop up in those, right? And so that, luckily we had some people in our team who were very good at these things. So that would include like making sure, we would have to dig 2 or 3 layers deep into the supply chain to make sure that like, this is RCM, but we would go to our component vendors to make sure, hey, this is our volume. Yes.
This?
Yeah. And then sometimes these component vendors, like we had a piezoelectric sensor whose the vendors told us like, no, the global production volume for that part you're looking for.
End of life.
Yeah, doesn't even like reach the quantity that you want, much less, right? And so like you realize, and then you have to substitute, and sometimes there's some weird material, like there was this plastic called Lubner or something that we had to find out that, oh yeah, this doesn't really exist easily. And so we had to swap. So like we had to go to RCM and then one layer deep into the components, and then sometimes into the raw material vendors to say that, all right, we need this much ABS plastic delivered on this schedule, this much cardboard delivered on this schedule to packaging. And so we dug 2 to 3 layers deep into the supply chain. That was one way. And then logistics was a lot more complicated. So they could, and so these were kind of things that we never imagined when we were building even 10,000 units that we had to get to. And so by that time, we had people on the ground. I would say even at sort of 10,000 units, having somebody that's a couple hours away from the production facility versus us having to fly over there. So if a problem came up, if we flew, we're maybe 3-4 days away at best, where somebody else could drive there and be there within a couple hours. That helps.
That's the difference,
yeah, those things. And so these were all sort of painful lessons that we learned along the way of as we scale. I feel like one of the major challenges that any hardware entrepreneur faces these days that we didn't have to face was our supply chain was fairly it was fairly narrow. It was basically over certain volume. In our case, we learned that like once you're getting to sort of 500,000 units or more, it was just southern China. That was it. That was the only place you could go to. Yeah. And these days, like everybody has to look all over the globe, right? The supply chain's diversified.
Very interesting. So basically at this scale, you really start to see this massive base of this mountain of products that you're making, how to support that infrastructure down there, right? And I think that's something that maybe, at the early days of a hardware startup, you don't even think about it. You're mostly focused on just like, market fit and just getting into more stores and so on. So talking about getting into more stores, at this scale, how do you pick on which retailers you work with, and what is a good contract with a retailer and what is a bad contract?
It was easiest to start with, I break them into 3, maybe today there'll be 4 classes. So there's like specialty retailers. So in the video game world, the specialty retailers is GameStop. And then you have these sort of electronics retailers. So that would be like a Best Buy.
Right.
And then you had these mass market retailers, Walmart, right?
Amazon.
And then these days, like e-commerce is a whole different beast. When you go to the specialty retailer, they take almost every product because their value proposition to the consumer is, if you want a video game, you come to GameStop, we have every video game that you want. Right? And that's their value proposition and how they differentiate themselves from Best Buy. You go to Best Buy, and Best Buy might carry the top 100, 150 games. So you as a product, you have to be within the top 100, 150 to go to Best Buy.
Right.
You get to Walmart, they might only carry the top 40 games. So you have to be in that echelon to get into Walmart. So I think that as you get into the mass scale, the first place to start is always get to the specialty retailer. They're almost obligated to take your product, right? And then you get to the electronics retailers, the specialists, and then you get to the mass market. And smartwatches was a new category, and they talked to Best Buy, and Best Buy had a lot of interest in carrying the product. But one of the issues we discussed was at that time consumers didn't go into Best Buy looking for watches. Right? When you wanted a watch, you go to a department store. Right? Or a special watch store.
Like, what is this thing doing here?
Yeah, exactly. Right? And so there's a little bit of a miss. Even within video games, there's sometimes this kind of miss happens. I remember talking to people at Sesame Workshop. They make the television show Sesame Street for kids. And they said the first time they partnered with somebody to make a PlayStation video game, they put a fantastic product and they put in the PlayStation shelves, and they realized, oh, the people who's the parents of Sesame Street age children don't shop in PlayStation 2 aisles, right? And so that game sold horribly. Wow. So there are, if you're trying to create new categories, these sort of very tricky things you have to watch out for. You don't want to put a watch in a retailer
Right.
that people where there aren't watch shoppers.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. So these are all very interesting points. So I really appreciate you giving the time to chat with me. So thank you so much.
Yes, of course,
I appreciate
Armac.
it.
Yes.
And you know, these questions are, I think, the questions that are in minds of a lot of hardware startup, you know, the founders and CEOs and executives. So I hope that this video has some value to them, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you, Armac.
Yeah.